I might not. Depends on how I'm getting murdered.
It's on it.
Okay. Sound check, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Audit and Finance and Administration Committee meeting for March 20th. Welcome, staff. Welcome some of my favorite visitors in the chamber today. Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Brad Clark, Councillor Cameron Crutch, Councillor Jeff Beattie, Councillor Taddison, Councillor Tammy Wang, and online Councillor Alex Wilson. We do have quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order. Please remember that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. We do not have any ceremonial activities. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Mover and seconder to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Clark, Councillor Wang. Any amendments to the agenda from committee members? Seeing none, show of hands, please, to approve the agenda. Carried. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of minutes of the previous meeting, February 27th, 2025. Mover and seconder to adopt the minutes of the February 27th meeting. Councillor Clark, Councillor Taddison, any discussion on the adoption of the minutes? Seeing none, show of hands, please, if you're in favor. And that carries. Moving on to delegations. 6.1. Andrew Selman, respecting privacy by design and the City of Hamilton's failure to implement its principles. I'd like to call upon Andrew Selman. Turn on your camera if you are here online.
Mr. Chair, I do not see Mr. Selman on the call. Perhaps we can move to the second delegate and then come back to him.
That's what we'll do. First thing we'll do is I will pass the chair to Vice Chair Beattie to introduce 6.2. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to call upon Sue Taylor to come down to the microphone to begin the delegation. Sue? I see you coming down. So whenever you're ready, Sue, you'll have 5 minutes. There'll be a ding at the 4-minute mark, kind of like a little warning for you, and then a final ding, but I'm sure that we'll give you lots of time if you need it. So we'll be generous with you today.
Thank you. Okay? My heart is pounding, but I'll do my best.
Oh, don't worry. You'll do just fine. Go ahead. Thank
you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and the members of the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee. My name is Sue Taylor, and I'm here today representing Interval House of Hamilton. I would like to first thank Council for allowing me to come today and providing a safe space to raise the voices of rural women in the City of Hamilton who are experiencing violence. Intimate partner violence is prevalent across all of Canada, and women in rural areas are disproportionately affected. When understanding the prevalence of gender-based violence, it's important to recognize that rural women absolutely experience violence very differently than urban women. For example, rural women experience intimate partner violence at rates that are 75% higher than those of urban women. And the lethality rates for women are more than 2.5 times greater in rural areas compared to urban areas. Research will also highlight the increased complexities that rural women face, including lack of transportation, lack of services, lack of emergency services, poor response times, isolation, and the cultural context of rural life. Now, many years ago, during the city's amalgamation, urban Hamilton joined with large rural areas and a super city was created. And though there are varying definitions of what is rural and an ongoing urban boundary debate that lingers, according to city data, about 80% of Hamilton's landmass, close to 220,000 acres, is in fact rural. And in wards 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 15, there are 206,950 residents, with approximately 50.9 who identify as women. And though I am not here today to debate any rural boundary, I can assure each of you that Hamilton is far more than an urban city. Recognizing this, in 2009, with the support of Judy Partridge, a past city councillor, and with the investment of approximately $139,000 of annual funding from the City of Hamilton, we opened the Flamborough Women's Resource Centre. It was our first step in supporting rural women. Here, we focused on supporting women who were experiencing violence and isolation and living only in the Flamborough-Waterdown area. Seeing the incredible work provided to Flamborough women, we knew we needed to bring this work to all rural areas, as the gap in services is just simply frightening. Our step one was to create a stakeholders table that consisted of our rural councillors, police, child welfare. We invited our MCSS reps and our city representatives. We knew we could no longer ignore the facts and the high lethality risk that women must endure when they are living in rural areas of Hamilton. Our step two was me writing about a gazillion grants everywhere and anywhere to try to get temporary funding to build our WHERES team, which we ended up getting some grants, but these grants were simply temporary. Currently, we have only 2 full-time temporary rural workers supporting all rural area with the exception and excluding Flamborough as they are funded through a different stream. The 2 temporary workers are mobile, and they remain mobile across all rural wards. They've negotiated regular drop-in times at 14 locations. And let's face it, there's a lot of ground to cover and a lot of women to support for only 2 temporary workers. Additionally, in this past fiscal year, we have distributed 3,500 promotional materials. We've done 17 trainings. We've completed 32 safety plans for some of the highest risk women we have served. And we have now served in this fiscal year 306 unique women. This additional funding, if graciously approved by Council, will be directed to hire 3.5 FTEs, full-time equivalents, to join our WHERES team, and we're going to drill down and we're going to expand our work across rural communities over the next year. Before my time ends today, I wanted to mention that we recently surveyed rural women experiencing violence, and though I can stand here for at least an hour and read all of their comments, I'm going to take some time just to read 3. One woman from Ward 9, Upper Stony Creek, told us, quote, "There is no help where I am in this ward. I am alone." Our second woman from Ward 11, quote, "Out here, I'm isolated. There's nowhere for me to go. He's going to come after me, and what am I going to do?" And finally, from a ward the woman did not wish to identify, she said, "I have nowhere to go. I slept in my car in the freezing cold." Just because we may not see the violence in rural areas doesn't mean it's not happening. I can assure you the violence is there, and many women are alone, afraid, unsupported, and living in very high lethality risk homes. Let's work together and let's get ahead of this so no woman or child living in rural areas of Hamilton will experience violence or death at the hands of her abuser. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And I should have made note at the beginning that you were delegating on 9.3, which is a motion that will be coming forward that pertains to funding for Interval House support services in rural areas.
No worries.
I failed to mention that earlier, but thank you very much for your delegation. Right on time.
Thank
I'll
you.
look around the table now, and I don't have view to the speakers list, but I do see Councillor Spadafora, Chair Spadafora. Please proceed.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and you can rule me out of order if I get a line here. The first thing I wanted to clear up is my relinquishing of the chair is because I am moving a motion directly tied to this delegation. So that is if anybody's wondering why, I don't have any interest in the Interval House. I have a lot of interest, just not interest that would make me in a conflict. Sue, I don't have any questions for you. I just want to say on behalf of myself, and I think I can speak for everybody here, thank you. And thank you to the Interval House family that's here today. We at least for me, I've been fortunate to learn the work that Interval House does through your leadership, through the board, through all the volunteers. And we've talked about rural, even though it doesn't affect Ward 14, we've talked about the challenges and how the difficulty for those women. And I'm super supportive. I always will be. And I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you guys do at the Interval House. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to look at Councillor Huang next, please.
Thank you for your delegation today. You may or may not know, but I am Council's rep on AMO, which is the Association of Municipalities Ontario. Every time we go to AMO and we get an audience with any one of the ministers or associate ministers with MCCSS, we bring up gender violence, specifically for rural. Councillor Mark Taddison has been a huge champion here, as well as your other rural councillors. I will say that AMO is also doing a ton of work around this. In particular, they've rolled out a gender violence toolkit for municipalities to essentially try and make the talk of femicide and the talk of gender-based violence so ubiquitous and like just start to really bring it out from the shadows. And so in terms of that work, this council has already also declared gender-based violence as an epidemic. So I think that when it comes to the support of not only this council, but also that of AMO, there is a lot of opportunity. I will say that we are still hammering very hard on MCCSS to increase funding, and in particular for your organization. But if there is anything that you would like me to bring forward, again, as Hamilton's rep that sits on AMO's board, please let me know, and that's something that I can bring forward to at the board level.
Through the chair, thank you so much. Would love to connect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huang. Up next is Councillor Brad Clark, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair Beatty. I'd like to have a better understanding in terms of what funding that you do receive, including from any senior level of government. So can you provide that for us?
Yeah. So we currently receive from MCSS a rural amount that's annualized of just $15,000.
That's 15 as in 1-5.
That's correct. Initially, it was $5,000, but through that key stakeholders committee, we had our MCSS reps at the table, and we advocated for what we felt and hoped to have been equitable funding for rural women. At the time, the maximum amount that we could have received was $15,000. We were successful in receiving that, and it is an annualized amount. I also have an additional fund that comes in of around $139,000, and it's been coming in since 2009, specifically for Flamborough Waterdown area only. And that's what's funding our Flamborough Women's Resource Centre, where we have 1.5 workers that we are paying to support women in the Flamborough area. And that is all the money, with the exception of our temporary grants. From a temporary grant perspective, I'm currently receiving temporary money from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, which is providing 1 FTE, and I'm also receiving money from the United Way, Niagara Hamilton, for an additional temporary FTE. That's what's giving me the 2 rural workers that are supporting all the other wards.
And so to clarify, the amount of money that you're getting from the province is 15,000 plus the 150,000?
No, there's 139,000 that comes from the City of Hamilton.
So we, the City of Hamilton, give you 139,000.
For Flamborough.
And the province gives $15,000 total for your program.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, up next on the list, I see Councillor Maureen Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your delegation and the information you shared with us. I'm sure you're aware, but I just wanted to put it out onto the public record that this afternoon at a different standing committee, the Emergency and Community Services, that committee will be receiving an overview of the outcome of a gender and safety audit that was done in partnership with community and headed up by the YWCA. So it is my hope that you will keep as I know you will, a firm eye on that and assist this municipality in bringing forward continuously solutions so that we can never waver from the necessity of highlighting this, but more than highlighting this, highlighting perhaps the role and opportunity of the municipality in everything from the built form to hours of operation to coverage of service. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no other speakers, but I do want to ask you a question. So if I might just temporarily pass the chair to my colleague, Councillor Taddison.
Go ahead, Councillor Beatty.
I just wanted to kind of follow up on a couple of themes. Councillor Huang made note of attending AMO and being our rep on AMO. The three of us, Councillor Huang, Councillor Tatis, and myself, Councillor Wilson, attended the Rural Ontario Municipal Association Conference in January. And one of the messages that we were trying to bring forward to the provincial government at that time was a recognition that Hamilton is actually far more rural than it is urban. And there are some structural encumbrances, I guess I'd call them, to funding sometimes because they look at us and say, well, you're not rural, so you don't qualify. And I'm wondering if during the conversations in terms of the funding that's made available to you, if any of those structural encumbrances, if anybody's come back and says, well, you don't qualify because you're not technically rural, because we are still basically considered an urban entity. Has that ever played out in your funding asks?
Through the chair. It plays out on so many platforms, to be honest with you. When we even organized our key stakeholders committee meeting, and we had MCSS reps at that table, and we were pointing out the facts, right? How many women are living in rural area, what the rural boundaries are, and clearly pointing out that up to 43% of Hamilton is considered rural, and yet the money that's being earmarked from the province simply isn't meeting the mark. And we can go back and forth with the province on this, like, for the next umpteen years of our lives. My goal here today is to say we need to stop, we need to put interventions in place now before we have lethality that's happening in rural area, and then looking back through an inquest saying what should we have done differently. So from an education perspective, it is with funders, it's with our, sometimes even with our own city champions, really pointing out how underserviced rural women really are.
Wonderful, okay. And just, I guess, for your knowledge, there's a group of councillors that we're trying to change the narrative on the composition of Hamilton. We were using a metric closer to about 80% rural, but maybe you want to, change your metric to ours, because it certainly sounds better.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to connect with you after and discuss matrices, absolutely.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll take the chair back. And if I see, I have Councillor Clark for a second time.
Can I ask a question about the motion that's coming up? Because the delegate won't be down here to answer questions when that motion appears.
I think that would be the only way you'd be able to answer the question. So please proceed.
Thank you. So the motion is for $250,000, and that's hiring 3 staff, roughly. What happens next year?
Through the chair, I don't know. All I can say is that I think right now, for the first time in a very long time, we're standing with allies, including our city councillors, to raise awareness and to advocate. Our hope is that Ontario will declare GBV an epidemic. Our hope is that we're going to be able to get additional funding, perhaps to the National Action Plan. We're not just going to accept the money today and say that our problem is solved. It just simply isn't. We recognize that sustainability is an issue. It's an issue with most of our services, to be quite honest with you, and it's probably the thing that keeps me up at nighttime the most, wondering how we build these great services and I can't get funding past a specific year. But we're going to continue to do it. That's what's brought us here today. A year ago, even maybe 18 months ago, all I had to work with was like $5,000. And we've been able to build a really great support, and we're going to continue to advocate at all levels.
Are there other organizations, Vice Chair, serving in the city of Hamilton that provide programming to deal with domestic violence like you're doing?
Through the chair, I'm just going to sort of just point, just add a bit of clarity. There are several VAW, what we call sister agencies, but we are the actual recognized rural lead agency. We're recognized through the province, which is why we receive the funds. And also, when supporting rural women, our approaches are based on best practice and different than how we serve women who are living in urban area. We've been doing it since 2009. We've been exceptionally successful at assisting women. We've got strong partnership with our rural police officers and with the police and with child welfare. So I think that we have a level of expertise that we bring to the table today that our sister agencies or other agencies may not have.
So no one else is doing what you're doing?
Through the chair, I would like to say that is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I'm looking around. I don't see any further members of the committee, but we do have a guest with us today who is our other esteemed rural councillor from Ward 15, Councillor McMeekin. I understand that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Please proceed.
Very, very briefly, the funding is coming from the Flamborough Reserve. The Flamborough councillors are in harmony in terms of presenting this along with the other rural colleagues and others around the table. As part of the process, I met with Angie Burton and Jessica Chase, our children and community service unit, and they indicated that the Interval House is the recognized Ministry of Children Community Social Services service provider for rural women. So it's interesting. The OOG funds, of course, are intended, all of them, to go back into the community, and this is probably a model project that, in terms of the usefulness of some funding. As for the ongoing nature, it would have been wonderful to try to do it for 2 years, but we don't do things that way. But we did build in a component in the motion to do an evaluation, and Angie Burton and Jessica Chase and their team will be involved in that, along with Sue and her team, of course.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Ted. Looking around for any last time speakers, not seeing any. Thank you so much for coming today, Sue, and please stick around and watch the proceedings as they unfold. Thank you again. Turn it back to Chair Spadafora.
Thank you, Vice Chair Beatty. I think what we'll do now is we'll have a mover and a second to receive the delegations. I don't believe Andrew Selman has showed up. Oh, he is here. Okay. Well, then let's proceed with 6.1. If we can have Andrew turn on his camera.
Can you guys hear me all right?
We can. Thank you, Andrew. You'll have 5 minutes to delegate. And then when you're done, if there are any questions, we will let you know. Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. First off, apologies for being late. Bad time for Wi-Fi issues this morning, but that's all fixed. My name is Andrew Selman, and today I'm here to speak about privacy by design. So, as reported by Joey Coleman in the public record, 2 days after I stood in chambers on January 17th, 2025, my personal information, including my name, my address, and my phone number.
Sorry, Andrew, I'm going to have to stop you there for a second. So, I've been advised by clerks that we can't have you discussing your personal breach through this delegation. So you can speak to privacy, sure, but you can't speak to your personal breach, if that makes sense.
I don't know if it makes sense because it is a matter of public record at this point, but I can move on past that.
Andrew, just give me 1 sec here. We got some stuff happening here. Just sit there.
Sure.
Councillor Clark, point of order.
Okay, so I'm struggling to understand the rationale of what I just heard.
Clerk Trenum, are you online?
Can you hear me?
We can. Councillor Clark, please proceed.
So, if I heard correctly, a constituent who had his privacy breached is being told that he cannot discuss the incident about how his privacy was breached. So please direct me to the appropriate section in our procedural bylaw that would say that. If the individual is going to speak about his privacy breach, then it's implied that he's giving consent to talk about his privacy breach. So anything less than that is obtuse. So help me out, please.
Clerk Trenum.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, it's more of a reminder to the authorities for response to the privacy breach. He's free to make comment on that it happened. He's free to discuss his experience in dealing with city services, anything that happened. The important note that, and we've advised the delegate of this as well, that the appeal process for this is through the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, and that specific concerns related to the breach need to come through either our office directly or through the IPC. But speaking about the fact that it happened, concerns personally related to it in terms of how city services are offered and privacy by design as a whole. There are no concerns with any of that.
So to be clear, the delegate can speak to what he experienced with reference to a privacy breach, correct?
Clerk?
Correct. The reminder is only that the venue or avenue for addressing the individual breach is through the IPC.
I understand that the individual can file a complaint to the Information and Privacy Commissioner pertaining to the privacy breach, but that's outside of our control here. If he chooses to do that, he may do that, but most certainly he can bring to this council's attention what transpired, perhaps in the hopes that he doesn't have to file a complaint to the Information Privacy Commissioner. Correct?
For you, Chair, there's no concern with him addressing it. We only speak to, and our reminder was really only to the privacy breach protocol in place, which is first to address specific issues of the breach through the clerk's office, followed by the IPC. Absolutely, he's welcome to discuss his experience and recommend changes to services or programs or overall policy to this council or this committee for council consideration.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. There's nothing stopping a resident from coming in and saying, here's what happened. I'm wanting the council to know. And that seems to be what Mr. Selman is wanting to do.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Andrew Selman, we're going to restart your 5 minutes and you can proceed.
Appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Mr. Trenum, there as well. So, as I said, as reported in the public record, when I spoke in council on January 17th, 2025, just days after I was notified that my name, my address, my phone number, that of my family, was leaked to members of the public, 3 members. So just quickly, I want everyone to think about how they would feel as members of council, the mayor, anyone of that nature, how they would feel if their address was shared with members of the public. So let me be crystal clear. This is a massive failure, not just for me, but for every resident that values their privacy and their right to speak without fear. Because here's the thing. Nobody should have to risk their safety just to participate in democracy. Yet, I've heard from people across this city who now hesitate to speak out because they fear the same thing will happen to them. Women that have experienced things that aren't fit for me to discuss here are afraid to speak out. And, that's unacceptable. Now, this is not an isolated incident. 1 year before my privacy was violated, in fact, on January 16th, 2024, so almost a year to the day, as again reported in the public record, the city clerk's office published the personal information of 36 budget delegates. Residents who simply wanted to take part in that budgeting process. So you ask yourself, why did this happen? Because the city collected data it didn't even need. Home addresses, what's the purpose? What justification is there for demanding a home address from someone who simply wants to participate in a public meeting? There isn't one. That's why privacy by design exists. So governments don't collect information they don't need. And when they do collect it, they ensure it's properly secured. But Hamilton didn't just ignore my privacy. They failed to protect it right from the very start. So let's be clear. One mistake like that is a mistake. Happening twice is negligence. This isn't just a simple mistake, it's a systemic failure. A culture where privacy is treated as an inconvenience rather than a fundamental right of the citizen. And that needs to change. So quickly, here's what I'm asking for. First, the city of Hamilton should conduct a privacy audit. We need to understand why failures like this happen and how to fix them. Second, the city must implement privacy by design across all departments. This means only collecting what's necessary, securing data properly, and ensuring clear accountability when breaches do happen. A simple fix the city can implement today: stop collecting personal information of the delegates. You don't need my home address. People can speak if they're a resident of Burlington, Hamilton, any city. You don't need that information. Third, there should be clear consequences for those privacy violations. Right now, these breaches happen and nothing changes. We can see that by the fact that this happened twice, almost exactly a year apart. That's not good enough for me, and it's not good enough for my neighbors. We need clear policies, we need accountability, because without it, this is just going to keep happening. This isn't about policy. It's not simply about policy. It's about trust. The people of Hamilton deserve to know when they engage with their city government, when they engage in democracy, their data is safe, they can speak without fear, and the city won't be putting them at risk. So let's fix what's broken, let's restore the trust here, and let's prove to the people of Hamilton that they have a government that can change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for your delegation. I do have Councillor Clark on the speakers list, so if you can just sit tight while he has a question for you. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. I listened very closely to the statement from the delegate. He used the term leaked, which implies that there was a motivation behind it. And I'm just trying to understand, does he really believe that the city deliberately leaked your private information, or that it was some type of error? Can you clarify, please?
I appreciate that question. And that was really a turn of phrase, sir. So I think it was, as shown by the fact that this has happened repeatedly, and it happened to those, large number of delegates, I truly do believe it was done in error. So to clarify, that word was probably a poor choice, and I believe it was a mistake as opposed to a deliberate act whatsoever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you also spoke to something that happened a year ago, and the delegate, I believe, used the terminology that it was negligent. Can you just clarify that? Because...
Sure. That one I do stand behind. So it happened on January 16th, 2024, where 36 delegate information were leaked. I believe it was probably the same mechanism that resulted in that leak. The information was collected. No changes were made to the process to ensure that did not happen again. At least in my business, when you identify an issue and fail to fix it, that's negligence. So that's where I view that perspective from.
Thank you. So the rest will be my questions for staff at an appropriate time.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't have anyone else on the speakers list for the delegate. Just looking again. Andrew, thank you for your delegation. You can now turn off your camera and follow the meeting online. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Before we receive the delegations, Councillor Clark, if you'd like to ask questions of staff on the delegation.
Do we have IPC staff here? Or privacy commissioner? Private, who deals with privacy here?
Through you, Chair.
Trenum online. Clerk, go ahead.
Thank you. So my understanding, and it was my motion, that the city adopted two things into the culture. One was privacy by design, and the other one was basically records being released without having people go through an FOI. So has any of that changed? Did we stop conducting privacy by design? Because that was already approved, so I'm trying to understand this.
Clerk Trenum, I know you haven't been here that long, but if you want to start to try to answer that.
So privacy by design, Chair, is a concept that specifically looks at ensuring we consider privacy before we start a project. So if we are looking at a brand new technology, if we're looking at any change to how we collect, use, disclose, or dispose of personal information or personal health information, any change to any of those processes require a privacy lens. In order to facilitate some of that work, a number of things have happened. We have a revision to our policy on this. We have brand new training through a training module that'll become mandatory for all staff, as well as we only recently now have two privacy officers that conduct privacy impact assessments on new technology, on changes as they're coming through. So absolutely, we are implementing this as we go through. Additionally, we've been in constant discussions, at least since my arrival, working with information technology staff on ensuring that our privacy officers are taking part in the technology roundtables as technology applications are put in for new changes, for new products, for anything that might be happening, to ensure that they're at the ground level to hear, hey, something's coming in, this might impact it. You require privacy impact assessment before it gets approved and moves forward.
Thank you for that. Seems pretty basic to the point that if we have privacy by design, then we are doing everything that we can to ensure that any identifiable information about any of our residents is not released to anyone that does not need that information. Is that a fair statement?
So through you, Chair, absolutely, that's a fair statement. Things that we are looking at are how do we make changes to our technology, to our how we collect information that better embeds protections into it, things that we cannot protect against, human error. The vast majority of privacy breaches that occur are because somebody copied and pasted something and sent an email. Prior to that, the most common privacy breach would have been somebody faxing something to the wrong person. We don't fax anymore, so that's not, well, we do, but we don't at the rate we used to. But the human error piece is the biggest issue when it comes to privacy breaches. It happens. It's not supposed to happen. And the best we can do is when it happens, we use our privacy breach protocol to work with that individual to ensure that they have the knowledge of where the error occurred and how to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. Another question. And when a privacy breach does occur, does the city send a letter to the individual whose identity has been breached, apologizing for it and explaining what they're doing to correct the matter?
So what happens is we send, through you, Chair, we send a letter to the impacted individual. As you may have seen in situations like the cyber incident, where a number of individuals may have been impacted, what happens is the website is instead updated and press releases are provided. We also notify the Information and Privacy Commissioner. The take-home message that I really want everyone to know is we never want to scare staff away from reporting this. We want to encourage staff to, when an error happens, to please report that to privacy staff so that we can do things like provide notification, like work with the IPC to make sure that there's correction, and then work with the divisional staff to put processes in place to hopefully ensure that it never happens again.
Thank you. So you responded that we do notify the individuals. My question was, do we apologize to the individuals that we affected through some form of a privacy breach?
Through you, Chair, absolutely. An apology is always necessary. We try to share the fact that it is important and that we are working to follow up on it, and we're working to make sure that doesn't happen again. I can't speak to what's happened before I got here, but absolutely we're looking at making sure that that is a key feature, that they're aware that this was an error or that something happened and that we're trying to correct it.
Thank you. And I just wish to acknowledge Mr. Selman for bringing it forward to this body to enlighten us about it. But the council and the staff have been working on ensuring that everything in our electronics, in our processing of things that happen in the planning committee, for example, where you're having public hearings, all of that information is protected. You'll see in the reports, it's usually redacted, big black mark. That's how we work to protect the privacy of our residents. The addresses are important. When we're doing a public hearing on a matter, it's important that we receive the addresses so that we know that the individual is from the municipality. Can people speak to it from other municipalities? Yes, all the time. You can see letters to editors for people from outside. But it's important that we have that information. What is far more important is that the public feel comfortable in giving us that information, and that onus is on us. If we fail to protect the privacy of some residents, then others, as Mr. Selman has indicated, will feel reluctant to share that information with us and may, in fact, feel reluctant to speak to us or write to us because of that. We need to correct that. Privacy by design will help us improve that trust that we have with the residents. So I appreciate the delegate coming in and letting us know. We still have more work to do. And Clerk Trenum, I'm happy that you're tackling it with the same vigor as the last clerk, because we're dealing with it through our information FOI office and really stepping into this. So it's an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Seeing no one else on the list, mover and second to receive delegations 6.1 and 6.2 and to refer 6.2 to the consideration of item 9.3. Councillor Beattie, Councillor Wang, show of hands, please. And that carries. Thank you. Just before we move on to items for information, I am going to go to Councillor Wang to move a motion to change the agenda so that we can have the interval house motion move up so we can have them get back to doing better work than sitting here and watching me try to chair this meeting. Councillor Wang, please go ahead.
I'd like to move that we bring 9.1 up to have that discussion right now, and my seconder is Councillor Mark Toddison.
Any questions, concerns on this? Okay, it's been moved, it's been seconded. Can we do this by show of hands, clerk, or do you want us to do electronic vote?
I believe a show of hands is sufficient.
Fantastic. Hands up. All right, carried. I will now pass the chair to Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Chair Spadafora. If you could please introduce your motion with respect to interval house funding.
Thank you, Vice Chair Beattie. It's moved by myself, second by Councillor Taddison. Before I get into the reading of the whereases, I just want to tell everyone I'm honored that Councillor McMeekin is allowing me to bring this motion forward on his behalf because he is not a member of Audit and Finance. So first off, Councillor McMeekin, thank you very much. This is an honor for me. Whereas rural women experience intimate partner violence at rates 5 times higher than rural men and 75% higher than urban women, CWF 2022. Whereas in 2021, the rate of gender-related homicide in Canada was 2.5 times greater in rural areas compared to urban areas, 1.13 versus 0.44 per 100,000 women and girls, Sun 2023. Whereas there are more firearms in rural homes than in urban homes, and in Ontario, it is reported that an abuser living in a rural area is 2.5 times more likely to use a firearm to kill their partner. Whereas rural women experience more challenges when a victim of domestic violence, including isolation, lack of transportation, a lack of services, cultural norms and beliefs and practices amongst rural communities. Whereas according to city data, about 80% of Hamilton's land mass, close to 220,000 acres, and approximately 68% of the land has rural zoning. Whereas in wards 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 15, there are 206, 950,000 residents with 50.9% identifying as women. Whereas the rise in the number of domestic gender violence situations has so dramatically increased that the City Council of Hamilton in 2023 declared intimate partner gender violence to be a crisis. Whereas Interval House was founded in 1986 to provide a response to assist women and childhood victims of domestic gender violence. Whereas in 2009, the Flamborough Women's Resource Center opened in Waterdown to support women and children experiencing intimate partner domestic gender-based violence in Waterdown and Flamborough area. Whereas the Interval House is recognized by the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services as the lead agency for the provision of rural domestic gender abuse services in Hamilton. Whereas the Interval House provides the only rural outreach to the victim of domestic gender-based violence living in Flamborough Waterdown area through the provision of no-charge counseling, safety planning, group program support, legal advocacy, including in-court support, housing and income navigation, employment and readiness training, and a mobile responses as occasionally required. Whereas in 2024, through temporary funding, the Women's Education and Rural Support WARES program was piloted by the Interval House Hamilton to support all rural women experiencing intimate partner violence. Whereas the WARES program focuses on interagency collaboration, public education, professional education, and advocacy outreach with the goal of decreasing the risk of lethal harm, increasing and making a survivor's sense of safety and well-being a priority, and providing, when necessary, a mobile response to a person in distress, including no-charge safety planning, counseling, access to necessary resource, transportation assistance, housing supports, and legal navigation. Whereas the WARES program works closely with Hamilton Police Services and Hamilton's Child Welfare System to ensure high-risk women and their children are identified and provided with necessary surrounding services. Whereas since WARES inception, the program has negotiated 14 safe spaces across wards 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 15, and remains both active and visible throughout the rural wards. Whereas in 2025, a rural hub will be established, which WARES and the FWRC will share space, providing a safe location to access services, including legal and housing supports. Emergency transportation assistance will also be provided to all rural women if required, thus ensuring access to the hub. And therefore be it resolved, A, that a grant in the amount of $250,000 be made available to the Interval House Hamilton to facilitate the expansion of the WARES program and hiring of rural crisis support workers for a 12-month period to be funded from the formal municipality reserve for Flamborough, account number 108032, that funds be exempt on a one-time basis and not to be counted toward any formula that restricts regular funding from the city, including the City Enrichment Fund. C, that the Children's and Community Services staff be directed to incorporate key deliverables and metrics into the funding agreement with Interval House and work with the Interval House to report back to Emergency and Community Services Committee on Q2 in 2026 with the outcomes of this funding support and recommendations for the continuation of any additional funding for subsequent years. And lastly, that the General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities be authorized and directed to execute any required agreements and ancillary documents with such terms and conditions and forms satisfactory to the city solicitor. It's a great motion.
Thank you,
and
Chair.
a long one. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair Spadafora. And I'm looking to the speakers list now. I recognize Councillor Brad Clark, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair. A few questions of staff. How many agencies are working in the city of Hamilton helping families that are experiencing domestic violence?
Through the chair, Grace Mader, General Manager, Healthy and Safe Communities. Rob Mastriani is online, the manager for our homeless serving sector. So I'll turn this over to Rob to answer that question.
Okay, thank you, GM. I'm looking to Rob, please.
Good morning. Through the chair, Rob Mastriani, Manager of Homelessness Operations. There are a number of agencies that support women experiencing domestic violence. An exact number operating within the city, I'm unsure of, to be honest with you. But in terms of specific violence against women's shelters, there are 4 violence against women shelters that provide emergency accommodation for women fleeing domestic violence, women and families fleeing domestic violence.
Okay, thank you. Councillor?
Thank you for that. How much money does the city of Hamilton spend on these agencies?
I think that's going back to Rob. Okay.
Through the chair, so for violence against women's shelters specifically, they are funded through the province through MCCSS. So we, unlike emergency shelters where we are their main funder, for violence against women's shelters, MCCSS is their main funder. However, we do provide a small amount of funding to each of the 4 violence against women shelters. We pay for what are called overflow spaces in each of those shelters. So there's between 4 to 6 beds that we pay for at those locations. So when those shelters go over their maximum capacity that is funded through MCCSS, we pay for what's called a per diem. So we will pay for a specific amount for when an individual is in that space. So across the 4 VAWs, the total amount is approximately $800,000, or maybe a little bit less. Sorry, my apologies. It's actually only around $300,000. Specific to Interval House, the amount for them is around $41,000 that we pay on an annualized basis, up to that maximum amount. And then we also are funding Interval House right now as part of our 192-bed temporary emergency bed shelter expansion. And the amount for that contract for the 12-month period is approximately $164,000.
Okay, thank you. Councillor?
Can I just jump in just to clarify too that
Absolutely.
the $139,000 that was referenced earlier also flows through housing services? Thank you.
Councillor Clark?
So how much is the province contributing overall? Do we have that figure?
Looking to the bench, General Manager Mader is looking to Manager Mastriani.
Rob can't see me. I'm looking at him.
Okay. Please proceed.
Through the chair, we are actually not privy to the funding that each of the 4 BAWs receive from MCCSS.
It's that low, eh? Only time the government says, yeah, you can't share that information, that's when the volume of the money is so low that they'd be embarrassed if that amount was ever presented in public. Can I get clarification then, Vice Chair, all humor aside, but in item A, it says a grant in the amount of $250,000 be made available, yada, yada. Is that a one-time grant? Or is this going to be an annualized payment from the city of Hamilton? Because what I'm seeing here is it's not for beds, it's not for a shelter, it's to hire additional crisis support workers.
So I'm going to look to the mover.
So the initial $250,000 from the Flamborough Reserve is a one-time amount, and then I believe in there it also says to look at and making it annualized, but I believe not annualized through the Flamborough Reserve, annualized through our budget process. And we will go, sorry, that's it for me.
I see General Manager Burden up at the top there, please.
Thank you, General Manager Angie Burden of Community Services, through you, Chair, to the Councillor. Would just like to provide some clarification on the funding. There are dollars that flow through housing services, as General Manager Mader has mentioned, for shelter. There are also efforts underway for gender-based violence prevention, which is not part of sheltering women facing domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Some of that funding has flowed from the City of Hamilton through one-time applications to the Community Enrichment Fund. And recently, Council approved $100,000 for the Women's Abuse Working Group. That is a coalition of organizations working in gender-based violence and intimate partner violence prevention. And that is flowing through the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan work and also the leadership of Director Chase and Community Services. So there are two areas, if you will, where the city is supporting and funding in increments. The funding that has been proposed today is one time for a 12-month period, which will extend into 2026. After that, as the delegate spoke earlier, we're not sure what will happen in terms of there is not sustainable funding identified, although the city has made an application to a provincial funding stream called Ontario Stands. The outcome of that proposal is still pending, but should the city be successful in receiving funds, that could be a source of funding for a several-year period after receiving those dollars. It does not answer the question about ongoing sustainable base funding, and we have not reached the point where there's been a decision to put in a budget request for ongoing funding. Thank you.
Thank you, GM Burden. I'm going to turn it back to Councillor Clark. You still have the floor.
So I support the program. I'm having difficulties with the process. If we are to begin this process in this manner, then I fear many other agencies will be thinking, what about me? And they will come in, go to a specific councillor and ask for a motion to get more funding. But it's not a formalized process. It's not a process where our staff are saying, okay, well, we have an extra $2 million and we're putting it out to see which of these groups can offer programming to utilize that funding. So it's what we call a one-off. And I'm frustrated by it. I'm frustrated also by the fact that we don't know what the province is spending. It's just, we have no idea. For me, that's unbelievable. Just totally unbelievable. I'll listen to the rest of my colleagues, but I have trouble with that. Incidentally, I didn't see it one time in the motion. I saw one time in B that funds be exempt on a one-time basis and not be counted towards any formula coming from the City Enrichment Fund. But I'd like it to be very clear that this funding grant, if approved by council, it's for one time. We're not getting ourselves into a situation where we're entertaining grant proposals on the floor and is going to be annualized, because that's a different story. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I have Councillor Alex Wilson up next on the list, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just wondering if General Manager Burden or if Director Chase is there are able to speak about any potential links to the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan, some of the work going on there in the prevention space. So how does this align with existing city priorities? Understanding that this has kind of come a little bit outside of the process, but just wondering if there's an alignment in outcomes, alignment in kind of what we're trying to achieve, or how does this link into the bigger picture of the city's vision?
Thank you, Councillor. I see Director Chase is ready to take your answer.
Through the chair, Jessica Chase, Director of Children's and Community Services. So certainly there is a linkage to the broader community safety and well-being plan. And we're actually in the process right now of revising that plan with a report coming back to Emergency and Community Services later in, I believe it's May or June. That report will come back, but there certainly has been a linkage. One of the things that we have heard is the need for us to establish strong relationships with the Women's Abuse Working Group. And we've been doing some work with them to understand what those priorities are. There was a report that came forward to council a couple of months ago that outlined some of those priorities, as well as some one-time funding in the amount of $100,000 to support the work that they're doing. Additionally, I would share as well that council did declare intimate partner violence and gender-based violence an epidemic. So that declaration was made by council, and we have been aligning that work. And the last piece I'll just mention on this is that we have a report coming this afternoon to Emergency and Community Services, which is strongly linked to our Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, that looks at gender-based safety audits.
Thank you, Director. Follow-up questions, Councillor Alex Wilson.
Not questions, just a couple comments, if that's okay, Chair.
Please proceed.
Yeah, I appreciate Councillor Clark's concern about process, and I especially understand that given that there's not unlimited funds, and especially that the city is already likely outspending other partners to achieve outcomes, move things forward. Absolutely, I need to be, whether it's strategic, careful, whatever adjectives we want to be using, efficient, for sure. And I think it speaks to the fact that, you know, the Community Enrichment Fund, I think about how there's been ongoing requests to increase that to better meet the need in community. I think about how, you know, this funding compared to the $100,000 to the abuse working groups funding, these numbers also aren't kind of keeping in sync with each other. And so I just, for me, very supportive of this motion today, understanding that it's one time, because I do think it's important to invest in community infrastructure, invest in prevention. I think that prevention side of things, that safety planning piece is a much more proactive place to be investing. Shelters are obviously necessary, important investments as well. Open to conversations about process to make sure we're hitting that efficiency mark, hitting that place where our dollars are going to the places where they'll have the biggest impact on the problems we've declared. But do just want to say, I think it is important that we build out those nets wherever possible. There is an opportunity here to create safety in community in a place where there is currently a lack and there's currently a struggle of safety for women in rural communities. Supportive of this program, supportive of that investment, but very, very both sympathetic and empathetic to Councillor Clark's concerns. And I think this is something for us to reflect on more broadly, is how we're prioritizing investments in gender-based violence and investments in building community safety and across the city where that's coming from. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Alex Wilson. I don't see any further speakers. Oh, have I got Councillor Mark Tattison up next, please? Thank you.
I'll say this. I think Sue came to my office 2 years ago. These are desperate times for rural women. The ask back then was $50K. I remember we approached the bench and asked for support. At that time, we were told very similar statements about a process is in place, we're going to be doing this, we're going to get some funding, we're working with teams. And here we are today looking for funding still. So for me, this grant is imperative that we get it forward today to support it. We'll work on whatever we have to do to ensure that Interval House and the city kind of get their ducks in a row, because as we all know, rural women are suffering and need this support. I see it, I heard it today in the delegates' presentation. I think it's very important that we support this today and figure out the process later. That's where I'm standing, and that's why I'm fully in support of the creativity that Councillor McMeekin utilized to have this come forward, because we've been talking about this, again, for 2 years now. So I think it's time that we support and figure out the details and the process later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tattison. Up next on the list, we have Councillor Kretsch, please.
I'll be brief and didn't want to use this motion as an opportunity to really talk about the process. I know this is really about supporting rural women, but I do think we've been here a number of times before. This term of council, I saw it in the last term of council. I know the YWCA's funding, specifically in the first year of council's budget, went through a process similar to this. I know we talked about funding for the YMCA in this last budget process. It went through a process like this. We talked about funding for recreation assets. When we talked about delegates coming forward and making proposals, we had a discussion very similar to this about not having a process. And so I don't know what direction staff need in order to develop these processes, but it seems like when we're considering applications from outside agencies, organizations, or individuals with respect to how to access city funding, we don't really have a robust set of processes, matrices, or evaluation criteria that's transparent not only to them, but to us. So certainly something we should take away as a group and come back maybe with some direction to staff to ask for those to be developed, because that seems to be a recurring theme at AFNA and ECS, where we're coming up against situations where councillors are saying, look, there's a dire need in the community here, it's a gap, and we want to fill that gap. And so we're taking maybe an extreme step to do that. And that's why I'm supportive of this, because I feel like there is a gap and it is supporting a group of individuals who continue to fall through the cracks. And so we need to do something about it. But I understand the frustration of organizations and my colleagues who say, look, there's not really a process here for this to work that's transparent, that really answers all of our questions. So thanks. I think we need to think about that as people who here are giving direction to staff. One of us should just put a motion on the table eventually to have this looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no further speakers on the list, but I'm going to look around the room and seeing Councillor Clark for a second time, please.
I appreciate Councillor Kretsch's comments, because that's exactly where my brain is at the moment. So can I ask staff, anyone, what is the process? How do we divvy up funding for social service programs like domestic violence. What's the process for this?
Looking to GM Mader, please.
Through the chair, I'll start. I think the challenge that we run into, Councillor, is that this is one of those areas where the city absolutely understands that there is a gap, there is a need. We have declared an emergency in this sector. The reality is, though, it falls outside of what our general responsibility and funding that comes to us is. So it is that area where we want to do everything we can. And as you can see, this kind of piecemeal approach to how we try and access funding wherever we can to address some of those gaps, but it's not a holistic approach. We know a few years ago we talked about the process for accessing funds, and we said the one process that has got a very robust approach to it and a fair, impartial approach is through CEF, our Community Enrichment Fund. But the reality is we also know that that does not have enough funds to go around to meet all of the demands. So we entertain these requests when they come through a variety of the tables that, you know, myself and GM Burden and everybody else that sits in the social service sector, that we look to see how can we problem solve them, what is the options, where are the available avenues that we can work through. We look through our advocacy routes as well. So we know that there is a gap in a number of these areas.
I just look up and I saw General Manager Burden's hand up earlier. I don't know if General Manager Burden has any additional information to put on the table.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to the councillor. I think it is as General Manager Mader has said, we are in that difficult position. We're also in the position of responding to council direction and understanding that as staff, we have a certain mandate, but that doesn't preclude councillors from wanting to direct funds that they have access to into particular priority areas, whether it be, in this case, the Flamborough Reserve, and the consensus with the rural councillors who want to make an impact in this particular space, or in the case of most recently in the last budget period where food insecurity became something that was a council priority. And increasingly we are filling that gap between what the province is not funding but has a mandate for and the local needs that we have in community.
Thank you, GM. Turning back to Councillor Clark now, please.
Can I ask, what would the response be to the following question? Is this within your core mandate? Is this grant something that we would routinely be entertaining as a part of our core services? Or are those core services to be funded provincially?
Seeing General Manager Mader first, please.
I'll start again through the chair to the councillor. This is where, in one example for, as Manager Mastriani mentioned, that we look to other avenues. We supplement. We look at addressing the shortfall. We've entered into an agreement for expansion of a number of beds with the sector. Because we know the demand is there, but it does fall outside of our core mandate.
Thank you. Any other follow-up? No.
Just a quick comment. I'm really struggling with this because I see the demand. There's no dispute around this table that there is a demand there, but it's not a municipal responsibility. And we keep picking up through piecemeal agreements these responsibilities, and we are acquiring them, and the province is quite happy to do the Punches pilot routine and say, okay, Hamilton's dealing with this, I don't have to pay anymore. And our property taxes keep going up because we keep agreeing to pay for services that are outside of our core mandate because our humanity is struggling with the issue to the point where we feel obligated to spend taxpayer money to offset that need. But we are digging a hole. And the more we dig with additional grants every year, the deeper that hole gets. And we are allowing a province to abdicate their responsibilities conveniently to the city of Hamilton because we will pick it up because we are compassionate people. And when you see the stats, that's why people come to Hamilton, because we have services. So I'm really struggling with this. We can argue it's one time. I'm pleased that it says one time, but they're hiring staff. That's not one time. Are they going to lay them off next year if we don't give them another $250,000? Because that will be the discussion. And so we are slowly digging that hole. My preference would be that we deal with the province on it and put the pressure on them. As long as we keep picking it up, they're going to keep dropping the ball.
Thank you, Councillor. Just taking a quick glance around the room. I'll offer a couple of quick comments before we call the vote. My thanks for the robust conversation. I think a number of points were highlighted here that pertain to some of the, we'll call them maybe systemic failures that we have to pick up after. And I'm sure we'll be having some ongoing conversation, but I do want to bring it back to the innovative intent of this motion. My thanks to my colleagues and the 3 Flamborough councillors for the use of that reserve fund to jumpstart this program. It does have benefit beyond the boundaries of the community of Flamborough, including the rural areas of Stony Creek and Glanbrook as well. And this is a deep need. My hope is that as time goes on, we'll be able to find an innovative and creative way to continue this program. And I'm hopeful for full adoption and offer my full support behind this. And of course, the gentleman sitting behind me, Councillor Ted McMeekin, my thanks to the councillor for spearheading and bringing this one forward. As a person that doesn't sit on the AFNA committee, he perhaps doesn't get the full credit because he's not the one moving the motion, but this was Councillor McMeekin's brainchild, and want to give him the kudos for pushing to bring this forward with the collaboration with Councillor Spadafora, myself, Councillor Tattison, and the rural Flamborough councillors as well. So with that all said, the speakers list is now exhausted, and we are ready to proceed with the vote. If we could have the vote brought up, and members can indicate their vote now, please. And that motion carries 7-1. And with that, I will now turn it to Councillor Spadafora, returning the chair to you, sir.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just before we get back to the agenda, thank you, Interval House, for attending and delegating, and thank you for all you do in the community. Moving on to items for information. We'll receive all the items at the end, so I'll take a mover and a seconder now to put items 7.1 to 7.4 on the floor, and then we will have the vote at the end. Mover, seconder, Councillor Wang. Councillor, okay, we'll skip that. The mover is going to be Councillor Tattison. Councillor Crutch will be the seconder. 7.1 FCS 25013, development charges, complaints, and communications. Are there any questions for staff on this report? Councillor Alex Wilson, no? Oh, wow. Okay. Councillor Maureen Wilson. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, let me extend my great appreciation to staff for the extreme efficiency in responding to the request that was set out previously in relation to development charges. And if I could, before providing any further comments or registering some questions, I would love a little overview of what it says. Thank you.
Director Weaver, is that you? Or yeah? Yes. All right. Take it away.
Through the chair, Kirk Weaver, Acting Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy. The report before you responds to a motion earlier this year, I believe in January, requesting information on the number of development charges complaints that we've received over the last number of years, as well as any information or steps we can take to improve communication earlier in the development process about and awareness about the possibility of development charges applying to a particular development. So the report indicates that historically, we've received either none or one or two complaints under the formal complaints under the Section 20 of the Act. That and then in 2024, the number of complaints rose to 5, and we have 3 currently active in 2025, which indicates a spike. It's not a high number, but each complaint results in a significant level of work in terms of preparation and results in a hearing held by the AF&A committee as well to determine the basis or result of the complaint. In an effort, these are the formal complaints. We do hear anecdotally that sometimes people are not aware that development charges will apply, and we're looking for opportunities to bring awareness earlier in the process. So staff have taken some steps in terms of, for example, the zoning verification process, where people can request information from the building department early or prior to their application. That now has contact information so that they can reach out to finance staff to determine if the likelihood of development charges applying, and if so, based on the information available at the time, the amount that might be due. Other steps that could be taken down the road include developing workshops, and these require a bit more work and resources to develop, but we require additional workshops, newspaper ads to make sure that it's more broadly aware how development charges apply, when they apply, and the current amounts.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you again. That was a great overview. If I could just ask a few questions on starting with the very last points that Director Weaver referenced. Development charges are a really wonky element of municipal policy and practice. And as an elected member, when we're first contacted by someone, usually they're not happy, but it's also given the capacity in which they're apprised and it's defined and why. Could you, again, I think we have a responsibility, and I know you share this, as a public agency to really make these things accessible and to provide the rationale. We don't have to agree with the rationale of why they're being applied, or the public doesn't, but I do think we have an obligation in saying, well, this is what it is and this is why. So could I just bring you back to the, how is that going to be communicated and where, please?
Director Weaver.
Through the chair, there are already a number of documents and avenues where that information is available. I think the challenge has been when in the development process, an applicant may find out about the nature or the applicability of the development charges to their particular development. So part of what we've done is providing additional links through the building and planning department, which is where applicants typically have earlier discussions in the process. If they're coming to finance, it's typically later in the process after they're ready to apply for the permit, which is when the payment is due. So similar materials and information are being developed and made available through the small business center, through counters at the building services with this building services team, as well as on the building's website where applicants may go earlier. So, and some of the additional information that I cited that we would bring forward later would be a broader newspaper ads or staff developing workshops and the venues and bring those workshops to various venues. That's for future work.
Thank you. Thank you. If I may add, there is a subcommittee of council called the Open for Business Subcommittee, and my colleague, Councillor Wang, introduced what I thought was was an awesome motion the last time it convened, and that was to put the hat on of a resident having to engage with the city with the intent of investing and opening a business. So I guess I'm just looking through the chair to Director Weaver, just assurance that in fulfilling the action set out in that motion, that the development charge discussion and the possibilities of further outreach and touch points, will that be included in that review?
Director?
Through the chair, certainly it can be. Staff are aware, or finance staff are aware of that conversation happening. And I believe Senior Financial Analyst Brooke, who's behind me today, will be attending a future Open for Business Committee when that conversation happens.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. I think it's in our interest as a community to ensure that when we have investors coming in and they want to set up shop, the hardest thing is accumulating capital. And then to be surprised at some point, particularly near the end, that they're facing a $90,000 bill for a development charge that they thought they weren't aware of when it came. They received their approval at zoning that, yep, that's an appropriate use for that site, go ahead, and then they run into this. So I think the due diligence that was set out by staff and our intentional efforts to ensure that when they're doing their financial planning, when they're doing their assessment of whether this makes sense or not, that we do all that we can to assist them and fully disclose what may or may not be possible. Thank you, and thank you to staff for the quick work.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, please.
I can sense the frustration when we're seeing an increase in these appeals to us. But in reading the report in the last couple of days, I was struggling to find a way that we could say no. And to be procedurally fair, there isn't a way. If a resident thinks that their DC calculation was miscalculated or wrongly applied, then they have the legal right to appeal. Even if they're wrong in their assumption, or even if they're wrong in their interpretation of the law, which is frequently what happens in most quasi-judicial tribunals. So I sense the frustration, but we're with staff. You're doing the best you can, and on occasion appeals come to us, but we do have to hear the appeal. And then we have to make the determination whether or not they meet the test for the appeal, which is those 3 criteria, which is very clear. But let's be honest, small developers, Chair, may not have the same understanding of the law as the larger developers who deal with this all the time. And that said, we've had some large developers appeal our development charges. So I appreciate the report. I can't see any way that we can fix it, because even if you send out more information to enlighten people, anyone that feels that the application was wrong, they will appeal it to save the money. So I'm with you, but I get the frustration.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Taddison.
I was reading this report, and I'll just summarize here. Multiple amendments since the DC Act, since 2019, through bill changes, Bill 23, 185, 108, 109, and 197 have added complexity to its application. So I don't necessarily ever criticize the provincial government. It's the hand that feeds us. But I think that if I were in the director's department, I would be frustrated with the lack of stability. In saying this, I just have a question in regards to the example that they used where a development fee going from $48,000 to $94,000 over 5 years. For me, in a simple layman's terms, I struggle to understand when inflation has not gone up 100% since 2019, why the DC funds have almost doubled since 2019. So I know our city wages have not gone up. The price of infrastructure, has it doubled, actually doubled since 2019? Is there some, can you help me with that?
Director, can you provide some help?
Through the chair, I don't have the specifics of how much infrastructure costs have increased in that time period. I will note, however, that the DC Act prescribes how the calculation to arrive at the amount of the charge is prescribed. Specifically, the number, and it can be affected by not just the cost of the infrastructure, but the amount of growth-related projects that the city intends to undertake to ensure the infrastructure is in place for the planned level of growth. So that is also a factor that goes into the calculation, as in addition to any inflationary impacts. From an indexing perspective, we use the construction price index for indexing on an annual basis. And in recent years, we have seen increases close to double digits on an annual basis.
Councillor?
Thank you for that answer. Can I just get an understanding of, I think it's called the SIPA program, Community Improvement Project. Does that have some play here for relief for, small town developers or?
Director Weaver?
Through the chair, the community improvement plan for the downtown area does provide exemptions for development charges within that area that range, I believe it's currently at 40%.
Okay, and then I think, don't we have them all through the city as opposed to just the downtown? Like, would Binbrook have an area?
So community improvement plans are a planning tool. So I'm delving into an area that I'm not qualified to speak to, but community improvement plans allow for the municipality to provide certain incentives within the geographic area. I can't speak to whether there's development charge exemptions within other community improvement plan areas.
Okay, thank you. I'll search for that later.
Thank you, Councillor Taddison. Councillor Crutch?
Thanks for this report. I think I seconded this motion and was enthusiastic about getting information back because I hear from small businesses on a regular basis. When I looked at the 10 pages that were submitted from the Small Business Center, there was pretty much just one small paragraph at the end that said, development charges may apply if a building permit is required to prepare the space where your business will operate. DCs are a development fee associated with development and redevelopment, which will help to fund the cost of new infrastructure required as a result of growth. Just as someone who did literacy for a number of years, I can say to you that the average person reading this is not going to take it seriously because it's the very last thing in the entire document, at the very bottom, at the very end, and that starts with may apply. So someone who's looking to fill permits out, has a whole list of mandatory stuff that they've got to take care of, is running around between departments, is trying to get help from the Small Business Center, is not going to necessarily understand that it applies to them. And so I really do think that the things you're suggesting you're going to do are vitally important. Not only should someone at the actual Small Business Center be trained in this matter to be able to speak to people about it and give them a lot more information, so they don't have to, quote unquote, go to finance for this information, but could actually get the services right there from the person in the Small Business Center is important. But also pretty much immediately assessing whether this person's going to have to go down this road at all, even if you can give someone a probable chance of that, would be really helpful to know, and then give people an approximate sense of how much it's going to cost them right at the outset. In fact, making it mandatory for someone to go through a development charges checklist before they're able to get permits would solve that problem. So I think there are other mandatory things we can do here to ensure, okay, this person doesn't have to get them, does have to get them, and it's done right at the beginning of the process. So someone isn't suddenly surprised where they've done everything else that they deem to be mandatory, and suddenly at the end of it are hit with a $95,000 charge that they can't afford. That's the thing I think businesses are asking for, right? It's just like a little more guidance, a little bit more of a heads up, and knowing right away at the beginning of the process. Because while I understand from sitting around these tables what a change of use is, most people who speak to me have no idea what that means or how that applies, right? So, and sometimes people will be making modifications that aren't a change of use. Sometimes they are a change of use. And I've seen things compared side by side before where I think to myself, gosh, those look identical, except for maybe a minor issue here or a minor issue here. And I get it, that's what finance does. You're looking at these minor issues and you're making judgment calls on them. And you've made great decisions, I think, and they've been upheld mostly by the law. I think what we're looking for here, though, is just a different level of service for people. And if you need direction from us, I'm happy to follow up offline with you just to provide that, to say, hey, we need to be doing this or investing more in these kinds of services to make it possible. But I really think that that's where the gap is, and I appreciate this being put forward because I think it identifies that gap clearly.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Clark for a second time.
Thank you, Councillor Crouch, for those comments. Very true. I think what also is got people a little bit agitated about development charges is they have been demonized by certain senior levels of government and demonized in the media as though development charges, it's an arbitrary figure. We just decide to increase it 50% or 100%. You know what, this year, let's do a 50% increase. And it doesn't work that way. There's a background study that's about that big when you're finished with it. And I chaired that committee. I sat there with our staff and developer, their agent, going through that background study where they argue whether the size of the pipe is appropriate or why they should be paying for this and why the city should be paying for this. And everything's being pushed down to the property taxpayer, but there is still a growth component to the background study. So you want to know why DCs are going up? Well, we're putting a bunch of ambulance stations around the city. We're putting a bunch of new fire department headquarters around the city. Police, all of those things are items that are growth related. You need to improve your services in emergency services and centers for them. That means the development charges are going up. You can't build a brand new community without making sure that we have sufficient ambulances to look after the community, that you don't have enough ambulance stations across the province or the city to deal with it. That's why the DCs are going up, Councillor Tattison. It's not an arbitrary, and I know it wasn't your intent, but the media and the public sometimes portray it as though this is just some figure we pull out of the air and we put it in, and you can change that. You can just put something else back in the air. You can't. You got to go through that background study. The province has changed the rules dramatically in the last 5 years, and those background studies are now being reviewed yet again, and they will change again. So I get it, but the reality is we need development charges to pay for these growth services. If you don't, property taxes are going to be increasing double digit to pay for that service. And I don't think the property taxpayers want that. So we're trying to find the balance.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else on the speakers list, we'll move to 7.2, FCS 23094A, Master Trust Pension Investment Performance Report, as at December 31st, 2023. Any questions of staff on this report? Seeing none, we'll move on to 7.3, FCS 25007, Master Trust Pension Investment Performance Report, as at June 30th, 2024. Any questions from staff or to staff? Seeing none, we'll move on to 7.4, FCS 25020, report of the 2024 remuneration and expenses as required under Section 284 of the Municipal Act. Are there any questions for staff on this report? Councillor Crutch, you're up.
I appreciate this report, and I've seen it before a few times. I think what I'm starting to realize, though, as we get more reports about what I consider to be councillor budgets, is that we probably need a more holistic tool. So I'm going to follow up offline about it, but I want to ask a couple questions first. What we have happening right now is the governance committee in the previous term of council put forward a motion to say that we should make certain councillor budget expense items available through the open data portal. So we have an open data portal that shows some categories for councillor expenses, but not all. And so when residents look at that, for instance, and they look back to last year, they'd see that I had something like $2.1 thousand, $2.1 or $2,100 in expenses for 2023 for my office. Of course not, I had much more expenses than that. When you look at other councillors, it makes it seem like they've got 10 times as many expenses as I have because of the categories that are released. And so that creates one picture. And then we get this thing, which is just kind of expenses that people are remunerated for that are relative to the certain part of the Municipal Act. And that's another piece of information that's out there. Okay, I appreciate the transparency. But if the average person wants to know what my expenses and budget expenses are, they have no way to find that out in any kind of clear manner. They have to look at like 3 different reports, and then still there's a bunch missing because in the past we sometimes had situations where we only had 1 employee in our offices. And so then the staff amount was not released because we were worried that it would identify how much staff was being paid. We've done away with that entire process, have a job evaluation process going on now, and there are more staff in councillors' offices. And so that's not a concern. I think we're at a point now where we really just should find one comprehensive and holistic way to present this information annually that's easy and accessible for everyone to look at and doesn't require us to do that reporting in 3, 4, 5 reports and an open data portal that's kind of incomplete. So is my assessment of the situation like reasonably fair, like that we have multiple ways of doing this and that it's probably not very transparent to people how to piece this information together?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, Shelley Hesmer, Acting Director of Financial Services. To respond to Councillor Crutch's question, I think that's something definitely we can take away and look to come back to bring a more fulsome report that maybe incorporates sort of looking at your budget and the details to that. So I can definitely take that away and have a discussion with Mike Zagaric and look to see if we have any changes to bring back to AFNA on a proposed process going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think the reason I ask this question is because I want to be as transparent as I can with the residents, but I don't keep track of all the finances for the budgets myself. If I have a document that is sent to me that shows me what the expenses are and things like that, but I, for instance, hold a lot of public meetings. Public might want to know, how much is this guy spending on public meetings? You deserve to know that. We provide food, we provide venues, we provide AV, we provide staff. So sometimes people have questions about this. They want to know. Those aren't showing up there. How much are people paying for their office staff? People want to know that information, right? And generally in an aggregate way so that people can have a sense. And so I think those are kind of the couple of things I noticed right away that were missing. So thanks for that. And I'll follow up offline and maybe we can work together to get something that comes forward annually that's just kind of all in one space. Otherwise, I appreciate this transparency.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark?
Thank you. I would appreciate that transparency because I think it's important that the public does know what the costs to govern a municipality truly are. And holding meetings, we don't always have access. Even if we have access to municipal buildings for a meeting, there's a chargeback. So it would be good if all of that was there. But I still struggle with this mindset, not only with council, but with senior staff, that when we're meeting with people, we should be paying for their lunch or their meal or whatever the case is, accommodations. I figure if someone wants to meet with me, they can come to City Hall and meet with me. They can meet me at Tim Hortons. I'll buy the coffee, but I pay for it out of my pocket. The city doesn't pay for it. If someone wants to meet with us, I don't believe that there is a need, and it used to bother me at Queen's Park, that there is a need to pay for a steak dinner because we're having a meeting with a constituent or developer. There's no need for that. And I don't think the public has, it's a bad pun, an appetite for those types of expenditures. So I will be talking to my colleagues about that and drafting some kind of motion at a later date so that we can address that issue. I think there's a lack of transparency. I think the public should know how many times our senior team or any of our managers are submitting expenses for meals or whatever the case is. All of that should be public information. And I would suggest that is not necessary. That if someone wants to meet with me, they can meet with me. And I don't have to buy them a lunch just because they want to meet with me. Thank you.
I'm not seeing anyone else on the list. I believe we already have a mover and a seconder, so a show of hands to receive items 7.1 to 7.4. And that's carried. Items for consideration, 8.1, FCS 25008, Master Trust Pension Statement of Investment Policies and Procedures. May I please have a mover and second to approve the recommendations in this report? Councillor Alex Wilson? Okay, Councillor Tattison? Any questions for staff? Okay, we're going to trip you guys up. We're going to do an electronic vote this time. Keep you on your toes. The vote is up. That carries 7-0. Thank you. 8.2, FCS 25002, Reserve and Reserve Fund Policy Update. Mover and second to approve the recommendations in the report. Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Clark, thank you. Questions on the recommendations? Looking around, not seeing anyone. Okay. Electronic vote, please. Thumbs up from Councillor Beatty and Tattison. And the vote is up. Yep. No problem. And that carries 7-0. Thank you. 8.3, Procurement Subcommittee Minutes, SCC 25-001, March 7, 2025. Mover and second to receive the Procurement Subcommittee minutes of March 7th and approve the recommendations therein. Anybody? Councillor Crutch, thank you. Can we have a seconder? Councillor Tattison, any questions for staff on the minutes or the recommendations? Seeing none, we'll go to an electronic vote. The vote is up. Thumbs up from Councillor Beatty. That carries 7-0. Thank you. Moving on to motions. 9.1, Ward 2 Community Grants, Q1 2025, Ward 2. Councillor Crutch, please introduce your motion and your seconder.
Thanks. My seconder is Councillor Tattison, and the grants are lined up for you. This is our quarterly grant report that now comes here instead of going to council. They're listed here as all the different things that are going on, supporting trauma and mental health services, supporting food insecurity, you name it. There's a list of about 20 grants here that we're approving for this quarter in the amount of $38,000 from the discretionary fund for Ward 2. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote. Vote is up. Councillor Beatty is a thumbs up. He's having some technical difficulties on his computer. Or it could be the user. That carries 7-0. Sorry, Councillor. 9.2, financial support for Sky Dragon Cooperative Redevelopment. Back to you, Councillor.
Thanks, and my seconder here is Councillor Maureen Wilson, and this motion is being put forward to help develop about 3 units of affordable housing as part of the work that they're doing at the cooperative to refresh that space. And this provides about $54,000 for an easement to help do that. Unexpected expense for this organization trying to do this work, bringing affordable housing online. So it goes in line with what happened maybe, I think, a year and a half or 2 years ago now when trying to kickstart affordable housing at the 272 Caroline Cooperative, right? So just doing what I can with the resources we have to kickstart small affordable housing projects that I know are not really at the main mandate of what we're doing here as a city. We're investing major millions of dollars into big projects usually, and these are little things that are falling through the cracks or have little amounts that will help kickstart them or get them going, and so that's what this is about, and you have it before you.
Thank you, Councillor. I do have Councillor Beattie on the motion.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, just a quick question in terms of totally supportive of making small investments to kickstart affordable housing spaces. Great idea. Just in terms of we're making a public investment into the project, is the registered owner on title, is that Sky Dragon, the cooperative itself owns the building, or what does the ownership structure in terms of the property look like? Through the chair.
I don't know who's going to take that one on. Councillor can't answer. It doesn't look like it. You might have to follow that one up offline, Councillor, unfortunately.
I'll take that as a takeaway. And Cyrus Triani, Acting City Manager. I stress the word acting. I will take that away and circle back with the councillor.
Okay.
Councillor Beattie?
I guess my only, I'm going to vote in favor. My caution is just that we don't know, we're investing in something that we don't know where our investment stands over the long term. If this is a property that's held by the cooperative, great. But if there's a third party ownership involved, I would just like to know how we track our investment in this facility over the longer term. That would be my only follow-up.
Fair question. If you just want to work with the acting city manager offline, please.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor.
Just please copy me on that message if you find the answer to that. I don't think it isn't the Sky Dragon Cooperative folks who own it. I'm pretty sure it is them, and they have owned that building for a really long time now. But if you discover something else or whatever you discover, I don't have access to those real estate documents over in my office in case anyone's wondering. So please copy me on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else on the speakers list, we'll go to the vote. Thumbs up from Councillor Beattie and the wonky computer. That carries 7-0. Just looking around, anybody have a notice of motion? No, you don't have to. We're good. No further business for the Audit and Finance Committee today. This meeting is adjourned at 11:16 a.m. Thank you for all your participation today. You've been fantastic. Staff, thank you. Have a great afternoon. Clerks, not too bad today. Not too bad. Have a good day.